Hi guys, Mr. Simons here. I'm going to talk about Gene's chapter in this video, and it's quite an interesting video in terms of seeing what happens from the mother's point of view, and we get a really good explanation. I was going to say justification, but it's more of an explanation of how Connie dies and the decisions that led to that. Um, and I think leading up to this chapter, we get the sense that Jean is just a grumpy old cow who, we don't like and we don't know why she's so grumpy, but we get, a really good sense of where she's coming from and what her hope for the future was and how that's been dashed, and then how she's really struggling to manage without a husband and having to work herself. Um, so yeah, let's jump into some analysis of the chapter. So just some background contextual information. It's 1941. It's 4 months after Jack has left for the war. Jean, she references it all the time, but we know that Jean is still angry with Tom for dying and disgracing the family. So it's not just that he died. It's fine that people die, although it would be hard for them. But it's about disgracing the family as well, because he was drunk and he fell off the back of a tram. Um, Jean focuses on being respectable. She references all throughout the previous chapters when we talk about, or when she's referenced. She loves this idea of being respectable, and she aspires to that. Um, so at the time, abortion was illegal, but it was still done. So that's important to know that it's illegal, and that's why everything's so hush hush and it's quite scandalous. Women shoulder the shame for having a baby out of wedlock. Men are not accountable for this, uh, but they were forced to marry the pregnant woman. Okay, so sex was a big deal, and you didn't talk about it, but everyone knew what was happening, and there's a lot of innuendo. You notice the innuendo in Annabelle's chapter when she wears the pendant, and there's really bitchy girls who ask her about her pendant, and they say, where did you get it? And oh, you haven't got an engagement ring yet. You wouldn't want people to talk, so insinuating that she's wearing a pendant. So she's obviously giving something to Francis, but not being married. So there's that sexual innuendo happening there that she's being promiscuous and not being married. Guys, I'm just going to look at some really basic plot points and then go into detail, because really it's quite a simple chapter as far as what happens. Okay, so at the very start of the chapter, Jean looks for Connie and finds her sick under a tree. Connie tells Jean that she's pregnant and that Mr. Ward is not the father. Jean takes Connie to get an abortion. And then after picking up Connie from the secret clinic, Connie bleeds out in the street on the way home. So you can see that as far as events that happen, it's quite limited, but there's so much discussion of Jean's thoughts and justification and explanation, and talk about society and how society works and being respectable and things like that. So let's dive into some of that. So just some detailed plot points there. Jean wonders where Connie is, and as she tries to leave for work. She works as a maid. Jack has just died, and the hustings curtains are drawn, indicating that they are grieving. So drawn is to close them, which means that they're grieving. They don't want to look outside. They don't want to interact with the outside world. Kit reminds her of Tom, and Jean describes her anger towards her husband. So when she sees Kip, drinking his tea and clinking it on the side of the cup, she gets angry about that, and she wants to punch him in the face. So she has dreams of beating Kip because he is Tom come back to life. Jean reveals that Tom won the treble only 2 weeks before the wedding and used the money to buy the house on Rowena Parade. Treble is 3, so he would have picked 3 horses to win in that order, first, second and third, and then he picked the right order of winners, so he gets a lot more payout. So yeah, that's how horse gambling works. Jean spies Connie under a tree in the backyard with her hands on her belly, and she's really hopeful that Connie will marry Mr. Ward. She calls Connie a clever thing for being pregnant by him, and she calls her Mrs. Constance Ward. She starts fantasizing immediately. She assumes that Mr. Ward has taken advantage of her, and that she's pregnant because Mr. Ward and she got along well, and Mr. Ward dropped her home after work sometimes, and they ate dinner late sometimes. So Jean views this as a good thing. Oh, you clever girl, you've got pregnant from a wealthy person. Well done. So that's about social mobility and moving up in the world. And one way a woman can do that is to marry well. Another way is to get pregnant by that man and then marry well, because he'll be forced to marry her. Okay. Jean is excited at the prospect of moving up in the world via Connie's marriage to Mr. Ward, and fantasizes about having a large house in Hawthorne. Hawthorne is the symbol of wealth and opulence, and it's further up the hill in Richmond. It's further away from the city, but it's just a beautiful little suburb. After Connie tells Jean that it wasn't Mr. Ward, she says that she'll go away to have the baby. She's wanting to have the baby. Jean thinks that Connie's life is ruined, and nobody would be fooled for a moment if she went away and came back after the baby was born. Jean, on the other hand, has it in mind to have the baby aborted, and she uses the phrase "done away with." So you wouldn't say aborted. You wouldn't use that kind of crass language. She says "done away with." Okay, so that's a euphemism for killing this baby or aborting it. She likens it to taking medicine. So she uses this metaphor of medicine leaves a bad taste, but it makes you better, she says. So the abortion is the medicine, but it will make Connie's life better, because she can then go on and marry well and be respectable in society. Jean is concerned with social status of the family. Tom took them halfway up the hill because he bought the house. That's the only reason why they're respectable, is because they've got the house, they own it, and they're halfway up the hill. And they're next to other wealthy people's homes. But also, Tom brings shame on the house by dying as a drunk. Jean indicates that saving Connie's future lies in the hands of a respectable woman who runs a business in Victoria Street. So it's an illegal abortion clinic. So it's all, notice how they don't say it's a clinic, they don't say it's an abortion, it's a hospital, they don't say any of that. They said a business in Victoria Street. So it's another euphemism for these types of places. A euphemism is a nice way to say it, okay? Just when you're reading through as well, notice how I am embedding those quotes into my sentences. Notice how this sentence flows very nicely, and the quote, sometimes I change it grammatically to suit this sentence. Okay, so just when you're looking through, notice how I embed it. You need to do that in your essays. You don't need to do page numbers, that's just there for you to reference. But in your essays, you don't do page numbers, but you do need to embed fluently like that. Okay. Jean asked the more perceptive brother, Kip, whether he'd seen Connie stepping out with a boy. She doesn't ask Francis. Francis is so bound up in what he's doing all the time, and he's reading books and dreaming about playing cricket and things like that. So she makes a point of asking Kip, not Francis, on page 222. Jean now has two children who gave up their chance to move up in the world, and then Francis's education is seen as the saviour. So Jean still looks to Francis to save the family with his education, and she just she sees it such a disappointment that the other two have given up their chance there. Jean spends all the money she has on the abortion. It's £25. So she's got some savings, which is quite a lot of money, and she keeps it under the bed. and she spends it all on this abortion. Connie's choices are to keep the baby, have the abortion, or do a swan dive into the Yarra. So this is Jean kind of speculating on what's Connie going to do, and she says she can keep. She could do a swan dive into the Yarra, so kill herself. Jean describes suicide as a coward's way out, and if it wasn't a coward's way out, then she'd have done it herself by now. So it's quite a morbid thought that she has about her daughter and her options, and that she could have the baby, or she could and ruin her life. She could have an abortion and just get on with life, which is still a horrible thing, but just get on with life, or she could go and jump into the Yarra, which is a horrible thought for a mother to have about her daughter. Jean thinks that she's making this choice to help Connie be a madam or respectable. She thinks it will affect the lives of her daughters and her daughters' daughters. So this phrase madam is a nice, it's an honorific, so it's a way to show that you are honouring someone in the way you name them. So you might say sir or Mr. That's an honorific, and to call someone a madam means that they are held in high regard in society. And Jean here is talking about how there's a woman, Mrs. Otley, and they call her a madam, and that's a nice way of calling, nice thing to call a woman is madam, which means they're respectable. But Connie won't be called a madam after this if everyone knows about it. She's not a madam, she's just Connie, or that girl, Jean returns home while the procedure is taking place. She enjoys being alone and having time to herself, and she remembers the police laying Tom's body out in the house. The undertaker prepared his body for burial in the living room. So because they didn't have a lot of money, they took Tom's body from the street and then they put it in the house where the children were as well. And the undertaker, instead of taking him away to prepare the body for burial, he prepared the body in the living room. You can imagine how that may have been for them. Jean looks across at the hustings and sees a curtain move. She grieves for them. They are alone, adrift and childless in the house because Jack is dead and he's the only son. This is the last page, guys. Last page of detailed plot points. Jean goes to pick up Connie and says that she's much lighter to carry, and Connie is barely conscious. On the way home, Connie falls and begins to bleed out. Connie hallucinates about being with Jack and moving out west, so she's actually thinking, when Jack comes back, we're going to move out west and we're going to be happy families and it's going to be all right. Connie claims that Jack was going to come back to her and they would be a happy family. So that kind of further highlights the tragedy of this situation, that Connie's hope is that Jack will come back and there'll be a happy family. Jean's hope is that Connie could avoid scandal and then go on to marry someone else. So it's all about hope for the future and how you move up socially. Connie didn't really worry about that. She was just going to nick off out west with Jack because he loved to be in the country. Connie mentions the biscuit tin. This is where she's put a secret photo of Jack and herself. That photo is the inspiration for the novel. Toni Jordan found the photo. Just have a look at your front cover now. That's the photo that inspired the whole novel. And it's supposed to be Connie and Jack. So, yeah. Jean remembers that what Connie was like as a child, and she was very dependable and did what she was told. She tells a story of how she's in the bath, and she's having a bath, and she would just sit there and wait, and she'd be fine when she came back to Connie, which is not how you treat a baby. If you put a baby in the bath, then you watch them the whole time, because they could drown very quickly. But Connie, she was dependable, and she wasn't going to move if Jean told her not to. Connie was good as gold for doing what she was told, which was a virtue in a woman at the time. So um, that's how women were supposed to be, were supposed to do what they're told, and supposed to be virtuous. So that was, yeah, that was a quality that she liked in Connie, but it ended up actually killing her. So Jean told her what to do, and it ended up killing her. Jean leaves her in the street for a minute, and it is implied that Connie doesn't live. So what does this chapter actually achieve? What do we get by the end of it? Well, it explains Jean's grumpy disposition, her mood. She aspires to be respectable and wants her children to be able to succeed in a judgmental society. So I feel like Jean, we see her as a bit of a pessimist, like she's negative all the time, but perhaps she's being a realist. Perhaps she understands how society works, and she understands how people view and judge others. And actually, to be respectable means that you can actually go on and have a job and have a life and things like that. So, yeah, so it's all about being respectable and respectability. We also, in this chapter, we explore Jean's situation. So her husband has died. She has to work, which is not common for a woman who has 3 children. And then she's pulling Connie away from an education in order for her to work. So Connie's got to work in order to support the family. We also see this idea of social mobility through marriage. The situation where Jean wants Connie to marry well, and Jack would have been a good pair, even though he's Protestant and his mother's doesn't like the Westerways. He would have been a good pair because he's hardworking and he's respectable. So Jean would have liked that, but because he's died, then that causes a big stir. Jean also has young boys who are oblivious to the problem, so oblivious to Connie's problem. They are very conscious of the lack of money and their mother's frustrations, though. We also see in this chapter that Jean has this amazing resentment of marrying Tom. She had many suitors as a young lady, and she says, "I had plenty of suitors, but none like Tom," which is a bit ambiguous. We're not really sure what she means by that, whether he was just a lucky guy or whether he was just a charismatic guy. He's like Kip. We know that he's like Kip, so he's quite charismatic and funny and an interesting guy, but I don't know whether this phrase here, this quote, "I had plenty of suitors, but none like Tom," I don't know whether she views that as a positive. In this chapter, we also see Jean's joy and frustration at being a mother. So she says there, "A husband and 3 littlies, the best day of my life, the reason women are put on earth." So she has done what women are supposed to do at the time, and she has fulfilled her purpose, and her life is complete with that quote. But then underneath that, we've got this idea, this is not how I imagine motherhood to be. And that's because Tom died, and it means that she is put in the role of provider. So it all comes crumbling down because her husband is dead. Just some key quotes, guys. "At least with Tom, I had a body to bury." So she's looking across at the hustings and saying that, well, her husband has died, but she got to say goodbye. The hustings don't. They don't have a body. He died in war, and the bodies stay over there. "Some days I can't bear the sight of the boy." She's talking about Kip, because he's so like Tom. This is her reaction to Connie telling her that Mr. Ward was not the father and that Jack was. She says, "I tell her about shame, and it's always the women who wear it." So that's just a distinction, between men's and women, the difference between men and women at the time. And she has this monologue that she gives to Connie, and she's just, she's kind of letting her have it for having sex out of wedlock and doing something so stupid, but also she's kind of reminding Connie of the ramifications of her actions, and she's trying to convince her to abort the baby. So in order to convince her, she says these words: I say loose women and no morals, and I say bastard and I say slut. So it's through that she's trying to shock Connie, like, oh, that's what they'll say about me and my son, or me and my child, and therefore I should go and get an abortion. But it ends up being the comment about Kip, that reminds her or convinces her to get an abortion. Jean describes Kip as having a soft heart because he's upset. So Kip has a soft heart, which is quite nice. The shame of behaving in ways you oughtn't. Notice that all the children could be described using this shame, and Jean is all about shame and being respectable. The opposite of being respectable is shame. So Connie doesn't ask how I knew where to bring her. She hardly seems to know or care where we are and what it is I'm doing to save her. Notice that it's an allusion to Jean having been there before. She's been to this abortion clinic before, and she uses the word save her. Jean is trying to save her daughter by having the abortion. Mrs. Otley says that it's been some years since Jean has needed her assistance, so further kind of indicating that Jean's been there before. And then Connie says, Ma, it's all I have of him. So the baby is all that she has of Jack. So there's this extra layer of grief. It's not just that it's a baby, it's that it's a symbol of him, and he has died. Jack has died, and so to get rid of the baby is also to get rid of the last thing that she has of Jack. Jean sees Connie as a little girl and her big eyes trusting me to do what's right by her in the abortion clinic. Guys, just some textual evidence. The narrative voice of Jean. So each chapter has different narrator. Jean's difficult life and hope for a more respectable future for her children is explored through her inner monologue. So the narrative voice is an inner monologue. The reader is able to learn her thoughts and reasoning, why she convinced Connie to abort the child. This humanizes Jean and explains or justifies her actions rather than simply viewing Jean as cruel or unthinking. Jean is seen to be trying to improve Connie's life. Even if she's wrong, that's what she's trying to achieve. The order of chapters: Connie's death in this chapter happens after the reader learns that Connie dies. So this is called dramatic irony. We already know that Connie dies, and then the weight of this chapter, we already know that, Connie, this is not going to end well for Connie. And then we see the graphic detail of it all. Guys, some symbolism there. The house, it's halfway up the hill, so it's about social status. Hands, this discussion of hands happens again. One of them that I found was Mrs. Otley. Her hands, though, are rough and flaky with great knobbly knuckles that stand out a good half an inch. I'd reckon she hasn't always been such a lady. So that last sentence, she hasn't always been such a lady, means that she's probably been of lower class for a while. And now she's having this increased social status because she owns that business. The photograph is a symbol of her and Jack. It's in the biscuit tin. There's a discussion of death throughout. There's a recurring theme here. Jean describes Tom's body, Connie's option to kill herself, and even that Jean has thought of suicide herself. Guys, that's it. Hope you enjoyed that.